Hello, I'm Chester Connell, sitting in for Tony Regisford. This is Unrendered. Our guest is Dr. Halimah DeShong, lecturer at the Cave campus in Barbados on gender studies. She is with us in studio and we're quite happy to have her. Let's continue the discussion. You are here to deliver a lecture, which you have delivered, and that was called Coloniality and Everyday Violence. Tell us about that. Why that term?
Well, when I was asked, and I was honored to be asked by the Open Campus, UWI in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we had been trying to see if I could come before, and the schedule wasn't connecting, and I was happy this year that I was able to come. And I just want to say thank you very much to the Open Campus. They've been so accommodating, and especially to Ronnie, Ronnie Daniel, who's been putting up with me.
Ronnie's
and
a
really
fantastic guy.
getting me all the information I needed. When I called, he would run around and try to get me information I needed in terms of preparing for the lecture. So I just wanted to say a heartfelt thank you to Ronnie and all the staff of the Open Campus, Mrs. Dalrymple, of course. And I look forward to see her the next time I come to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. They've been really, really accommodating. I wanted to say that. In terms of the topic for the lecture, when they asked me, I knew it was going to be part of the emancipation commemoration of the 176th anniversary of emancipation in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I wanted to do something in which we could reflect historically on the period of colonialism. I also wanted to think about an area in the Caribbean that we need to do more work around. And for me, because I've been doing work on violence, that came readily. And I started thinking about, I wasn't just thinking about gender-based violence in this case, I was thinking about the levels of violence in the Caribbean and what accounts for that. And I was thinking that, it's sort of erroneous to start from today to think about why we are having so many violent crimes, gun-related crimes, and so on. And I said, it is about coloniality, because coloniality really is about the ways in which the colonial structures, administration, ideas, belief systems resonate with us today, and the extent to which they impact on various aspects of our social life. And a fundamental question, I think, in thinking about the lecture is the way in which colonialism has shaped what it means to be human in the Caribbean.
Really?
And those were the kind of things that came to me, and I wanted to see the way in which, whether it would make sense to put these things together. I also wanted to talk about gender-based violence because I think it is one of the most enduring forms of violence, and it cannot be explained as necessarily a consequence of colonialism, because like other forms of violence, it predated, and it happens in so many different
yes, and I want to ask a question there.
Yes.
Coloniality. What about the rest of the world where colonialism did not take place, which is not very many places, because somebody was always colonizing somewhere, I suppose.
Somebody was always a colonizer, even if they may not have been, they may have had some form of imperialist rule or some sort of quasi-colonialism.
So are you saying that let's say Japan, which was a colonial power, China, all the European countries, would you say that the same?
I won't say the same, because colonialism manifested differently in different spaces. There was something particularly insidious about British colonialism, French colonialism in the Caribbean. And for us who have experienced, our ancestors, and continue to experience the effects of British colonialism and the chattel slavery that came with that, the way in which the native genocide that came with that, the complete marginalization of indigenous peoples, the way in which persons who came as migratory workers under indentureship, the way in which they were positioned in the society. We think about how we still grapple with issues around regionalism, and we remember the divide and rule policies of the British. So there's so many things that I think in this moment, Jackie Alexander talks about this quite a lot, decolonization as an ongoing process, and the need to engage in healing work as we do that continuous process of this decolonization. Because it's no surprise that for a system that lasted for centuries, independence comes and it's going to change overnight.
Absolutely. I always like to say, you know, you enslave somebody for 200-300 years. In 1834, 1838, you take off the shackles and you say, you're free to go. No education.
Take off the shackles.
Take off the shackles, yes. And then you're free to go. So it's no wonder we have a, what I call, you know, a van driver mentality or a gender-based violence. I just want to make sure we cover everything. The gender-based violence is violence based on someone's gender.
Gender-based violence.
How do you define gender?
And I'll go through gender-based violence. Let me start with gender. So the short answer is gender is a concept used within, as we use it within doing feminist work and gender studies and so on, is to signal how the ideas constructed about what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a man, the ideas constructed about masculinity and femininity. However, it's not enough to talk about the social construction of masculinity and femininity. There are effects. There are the ways in which we rank masculinity and femininity differently. The ways in which, as a consequence of this ranking that takes place, there's certain unequal relations of power which emerge. So if you think about gender-based violence, especially let's take intimate partner violence, for instance, in the context of heterosexual relationships between women and men, women who experience violence, persons who experience violence in those relationships are most likely to be women. Persons who are most likely to be injured are most likely to be women and seriously injured. If you look at the statistics for intimate partner homicide, in the context of heterosexual relationships, women are usually the most likely victims of intimate partner homicide, with men being the more likely to be perpetrators. And women are gender-based violence signals the fact that women are attacked because they are women. Children are attacked because the vulnerability of age.
Right.
Girls are more likely to be attacked than boys.
Which is part of gender.
Precisely. But we have to expand the scope, because gender-based violence also has expanded to include the way in which both gender and sexuality are factors that influence who ends up being a victim and who ends up being a perpetrator. So the kinds of violence we see meted out to persons who are identified as lesbian, gay, transgendered, bisexual, trans men, trans women, and I could explain those terms further. The fact that they are attacked because of some perceptions about their sexuality, or because they self-identify or claim a sexual orientation that does not accord with what might be determined to be the mainstream heterosexual orientation. So gender-based violence encompasses those forms of sexualized violence against people as well. And the way in which sometimes there is a non-response to the violence experienced by persons who may be identified as being from this particular group.
That would include our police, our counselors,
the way in which,
church.
And I think probably in terms of the reports that have been in the papers, you see more reports coming from other countries. You see reports from Guyana, from Jamaica, from Trinidad and Tobago. I've not necessarily seen reports. There may be anecdotal evidence, but an activist from Guyana, Charlene Naga, she has written recently about the experiences of LGBT persons, trans women, in terms of the threats, sometimes being physically harmed because they identified, sometimes being threatened with corrective rape, that is rape that would rape to discipline you into the quote-unquote correct sexuality. And these are real issues that we need to address. What I think tends to happen is that there's this sort of assumption that there is this gay agenda lurking out there that is seeking to have all these changes, the discourse to undermine the society and so on. But what we're really talking about here, for the persons who are out there in the trenches as LGBT activists, they're claiming citizenship rights.
Yes.
So this is now beyond whether or not you think a person's sexual orientation is wrong or not. This is about ensuring that people can be safe regardless to how they might identify or they might be identified, and that people could access jobs, that people could access the full rights of citizens. And I think we have a responsibility to ensure that that is the case as a society for everyone, regardless of race, sexuality, gender, and all those other social categories that we create.
I want to ensure that you get out the information. You were talking on gender-based violence, violent crimes, and epistemic violence.
Yes.
So we need to talk about epistemology and the epistemic violence that comes out of that.
Yes.
Explain to us what is epistemology and epistemic violence.
Okay, so epistemology is sort of the investigation of how we know what we know. How have we arrived at a particular set of knowledge claims? How have we arrived at a particular kind of worldview? Why is it the worldview of particular groups tend to be more dominant than others? Why is it that we tend to marginalize certain kinds of knowledges and the kind of power relations that allow for that to happen? So I was explaining earlier that there's nothing innocent about the knowledge we have. The knowledge we have is very political. And by that I mean the knowledge systems that we have inherited is carefully managed by those who would have, by individuals in society who held on to power.
Yes.
This is not to say that other knowledge systems didn't survive, but the way in which those knowledge systems are regarded. So if epistemology is about knowledge claims, how we know what we know, how have we arrived at particular kinds of knowledges, and the politics surrounding, the power relations surrounding knowledge creation. Epistemic comes from that word, epistemology.
The adjective.
Right. So epistemic violence is about the forms of cultural erasure experienced by particular groups as a consequence of the colonial, using colonialism as an example. The deliberate attempt at cultural erasure, at invalidating the belief systems and so on of first the indigenous peoples, later enslaved Africans, and the way in which, if we think about indentureship, it might have been as less aggressive as it relates to East Indians, but there was still a way in which their belief system didn't necessarily receive the kinds of legitimacy as, say, those of the Europeans. So just to sort of think about this a little bit, the banning of drumming under enslavement, the changing of names, the way in which there was a deliberate effort for the languages of different African groups to be lost. So you mix everybody up. And ultimately, to communicate, you have to communicate in a language accessible to persons from different groups. So for those of us who ended up in the British territories, our language is English, whether that be the standard variety or not. For persons who ended up in French territories, so the languages that tend to dominate in the Caribbean now are the languages of European countries, Western Europe.
And so pervasive and powerful is it that if you were to take out the English language from, the continent of Africa, it would probably shut down because Africans could not communicate with each other.
And we're talking about a colonialism of the 20th century.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah.
So your lecture, Coloniality and Everyday Violence, was to mark the 176th anniversary of emancipation.
Yes.
And it was well attended?
It was, well, I'm not sure if you know what the Open Campus Hall is, and I think it would have been about 3/4 full, almost full.
How do you see that as a reflection of persons getting with the program, so to speak?
Well, what I was saying last night is that I got the feeling, and I was very appreciative that people came and they really engaged. That was humbling for me. But I was happy and sad at the same time that people who were there were people who were committed to the upliftment of Vincentian society. Because the kind of responses and the kinds of interventions that people made. My main question is, how do we get these conversations taking place in other spaces? Because I am not claiming by any means that I have the right answers. But what I think needs to happen is that people need to be more engaged and more connected to the meaning of these things in Caribbean societies, what it means for identity, what it means for progress. How do we imagine progress in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, for
identity.
instance?
We'll pick up on identity
Okay.
when we return.
Okay.
We're chatting with Halimah DeShong, PhD, lecturer at Cave campus in Barbados on gender studies. This is Unrendered. We'll be right back.